Good morning, scholars. Today we're going to continue our way through Pharr's Homeric Greek, a book for beginners, continuing our review chapter of Lesson 12 with Part 2, looking at pronouns, adverbs, etc. So the pronouns that we have learned so far are, first off, the possessive pronouns of the first person and the second person, mine, emos, eme, emon, and yours, singular, sos, se, son. And then we have alos, ale, alo, which is really an adjective, but it's included here because of the way it inflects, and that with the Omicron sigma in the masculine, the eta in the feminine, but then the Omicron alone in the neuter. So you will see that that is the theme of this group of pronouns. And so alos gets included there. So you see with hautos, haute, hauto, ekgenos, ekgene, ekgeno, which can be presented in Homer without the epsilon, kenos, kene, keno, and then finally hutos, haute, duto. So each of these ekgenos and hutos has its own particular usage. Ekgenos being equivalent to the English that, pointing to something that's more remote to the speaker, and hutos being the equivalent of this, something that's closer to the speaker. And these can be both adjectival. I can say this car, that rabbit, but I can just also say this man. Or I can say hutos, and in Greek, the fact that it's masculine and singular, it will be equivalent to, this guy, this man, Achilles, who I've referred to previously. Hutos, he, blah, 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 blah. So these are very important to learn and recognize, and you'll hardly ever read a page of Greek without them. And then next we have hos, he, ho, what are called the relative pronouns, and these get used in a way that I'll describe once we start dealing with the first opening lines of the Iliad, but they need to be learnt, these forms, and basically the equivalent of who in English, but declined according to gender and number fully in Greek, as we would expect. And then ho, he, to, which in later Greek is a definite article, the word for the, but in Homer has a wider usage, as we will see. And then tis, ti, the question mark, who, what, or when it's enclitic indefinite, someone, something. So these are the pronouns that you should be familiar with by now and have learned the declension of. Now, most important is this chart of correlative pronouns, and I should have put the section of Smyth here that these are at, but I didn't. So, but this chart of correlative pronouns is one of the most important charts of all in Smyth, and I wanted to show how the pronouns that we've seen so far fit on this first line. So this chart shows how these pronouns are related as first the interrogative, indirect, or direct. So who was that man? The indefinite, enclitic, that man was someone I met a few days ago. The demonstrative, this man or that man. And as we see here, Homer uses ho, he, to as an additional demonstrative, something you'll see a bit of it in Herodotus, but not really in Attic writers like Plato. And then next, the relative pronoun, who, which, equivalent to Latin qui, hos, he, ha. And then last but not least, a combination of the relative with the interrogative, hostis, whoever, anyone, equivalent to Latin quis, qui, quinque. So this chart of correlative pronouns, along with the chart of correlative adverbs, which can be found in Smyth, is one that you should copy out and paste on your wall or on your desk very quickly so you can begin to consolidate your sense of these important words and the way they relate to one another, because there's these tiny little words that will drive you crazy if you don't have a sense of them. So here, as I said, the Homeric use of ha, he, ta is somewhat different. Writing from the Attic perspective, Smyth writes at 1099, the article he, ha, he, ta was originally a demonstrative pronoun, and as such supplied the place of the personal pronoun of the third person. That means he, she, it. By gradual weakening, it became the definite article. It also serves as a relative pronoun. So ha as a demonstrative is still retained in part in Attic prose, while the beginnings of its use as an article are seen even in Homer. So more specifically, reading at Smyth 11:00, he says, in Homer, ha, he, ta is usually a demonstrative pronoun and is used substantively as a noun or adjectively to modify a noun. It also serves as the personal pronoun of the third person. So, ala to daumazdo, ala to daumazdo, but I marvel at this. Ta here is simply the accusative, singular, neuter, demonstrative pronoun. And then I'll go to the last example, very famous. Tain ego ulu so. Tain ego ulu so. This is Agamemnon's denial that he will not release the daughter of the priest Chryses back to him. Chryses back to him. Her, tain, ego, I, luso, will not release. So here we see tain, the accusative feminine singular of the ha, he, ta, being used as the personal pronoun of the third person to simply mark her. So the adverbs that we've seen so far, ale, otherwise, altis, then, again, te, why, ook, before aspirated sound, just the negation of a fact. And then hoka, by far, he is by far the best. These are the adverbs that we've learned so far. And likewise, the chart of correlative adverbs parallel to the chart of correlative pronouns. And we see here the line of that chart, one line of that chart, where we can place these two correlative adverbs that Pharr has given us so far. Taute, the demonstrative, then, pointing to a time, and the relative specific, haute, when. He was there then when I sold the car. And we see, again, the way these are correlated. because we'll have pote, interrogative, direct or indirect, when, pote, enclitic, sometime or ever, tote, then, the demonstrative, hote, when, and then hopote, whenever. Whenever I see you, I think of the good old days. So, again, I cannot overemphasize how important these two charts are for your understanding of Greek. Now, here we come upon our prepositions/adverbs that Pharr has presented us with so far. Ana, on, can mean up or through, across. Ace, S is usually with the accusative, direction towards. Ek, X, direction out of. And in, any, ain, position inside of an object. So, reading from Smyth 1636, prepositions define the relations of a substantival notion to its predicate. All prepositions seem to have been adverbs originally, and mostly adverbs of place. As adverbs, they are case forms. Several are locatives, as peri, which means around. And Smyth, he runs through the development. He has a nice presentation of the historical development of prepositions, and that begins with stage 1 at section 1638. He writes, originally the preposition was a free adverb, limiting the meaning of a verb, but not directly connected with it. Kat, ar, hezdeto. Kat, dar, hezdeto. Down he sat him. Down he sat him. In this use, the preposition may be called the prepositional adverb. So kata, that first word, is a preposition that means down. And so hezdeto, he made him to set down at that point. Now, you can go back to that section of Smyth and learn about the further stages of the development of the prepositions, but I decided to delay that full exposition to the chapter down the road when Pharr actually presents the prepositions. So for now, I want to turn to what are known as the sentence adverbs. These are adverbs that modify the whole sentence and coordinate or express the relation of one sentence or phrase to another. And otherwise, these are called particles. So you have the wonderful work, Deniston's The Greek Particles, and a big fat book dedicated to these. And why would you need a big fat book dedicated to these? Because, as Smyth tells us in this, one of my truly favorite sections of the grammar, he says, Greek has an extraordinary number of sentence adverbs, or particles in the narrow sense, having a logical or emotional, that is, rhetorical value. Either alone or in combination, these sentence adverbs give a distinctness to the relations between ideas which is foreign to other languages, and often they resist translation by separate words, which in English are frequently over-emphatic or cumbersome in comparison to the light and delicate nature of the Greek originals. Example, ara, ge, toi. The force of such words is frequently best rendered by pause, stress, or alternations in pitch. So that's the key idea here. You have these wonderful tiny little particles in Greek, these tiny little 2 or 3 word things that often are equivalent to what in English is merely a matter of pause, stress, or pitch. And this is my favorite sentence. To catch the subtle and elusive meaning of these often apparently insignificant elements of speech challenges the utmost vigilance and skill of the student. I'll read it again simply because it makes me so happy. To catch the subtle and elusive meaning of these often apparently insignificant elements of speech challenges the utmost vigilance and skill of the student. And indeed, the Greek particles are absolutely wonderful, especially, for instance, in Plato, where almost all of the humor of the Platonic dialogues rests in the sense of the particles that are being given to these utterances of Socrates. Okay, enough of that. So, the particles are sentence adverbs that he's given us so far, that we're responsible so far. Dealing with them in the simplest terms, Allah is equivalent to English but. I love her, but. Gar, which is post-positive, which means it's always a second word in its sentence. It is equivalent to English for, F-O-R, when it is explaining the reason for the previous utterance. I'm selling my car for it's just become a deep hole that I throw money into. I love Lucy for she's the kindest soul I've ever known. Okay. The next is de, and de is probably the most common used particle, and it can mean and, it can mean but, it can even mean so, and it's used mainly just to continue the narrative. So if you open your Gospel of Mark and look at the initial paragraphs of that, you will see de as the second word of almost every sentence, because Mark is just thundering through the progress of the action of Jesus' early ministry. Okay, we have kai, which is equivalent to English and. We have kai, which is equivalent to both and. We have te, which is also accusative to and, but it comes at the end of the word. Te and te kai are roughly both and. We'll see how these work in context, but again, the single word equivalents that I've just given you are just an entryway. Okay, so Allah, gar, de, kai, te, and te kai. Conjunctions, on the other hand, so far he's given us one conjunction, Pharr has, unica, and I thought I would just look at the whole entry for unica. He says, hunica, rough aspiration, hunica. In poets, before a vowel, huniken, it's a relative conjunction equivalent to hu henica, on account of which, wherefore, in Homer. Okay. Secondly, the relative tunica means for that or because in Pindar and Tragedy. And 3, after certain verbs, just like hote, Latin quod, that, the fact that. After edenai, noen, erein, to know that, to think that, to say that, edenai, hote, noen, hote, erein, hote. And after iste, and mantain. Iste, no, hote, know that, iste, mantain. So, after certain verbs, hunica can be used in the same way. And then, secondly, it's a preposition with a genitive equivalent to henica or heinica on account of because, and this usage occurs in Aeschylus and Sophocles. But for our purposes, just recognize that it means wherefore, on which account. He loved her, Hunica. He did everything she asked of him. And finally, we have this prefix on or a before consonants. And on a is equivalent to the English un. I am unfree. It negates. So on a before a consonant is called alpha-privative with a negative force, like English in or English un or less. So anaxios is unworthy equals ukaxios. Anomos is unlike. Atimos is unhonored. Atheos is godless. Gamos, agamos, a marriage that is not no marriage. And alpha a is also found before words once beginning with digamma or sigma. So aedes, unpleasant, because aedes was admittedly suedes, like suavis of Latin. Oratos, unseen. Oplos, without a shield. And by contraction with the following vowel, you get akon, unwilling. But alpha nu often appears on elpistos, unhoped for, on oplos, without a shield. So a and on represent weak forms of the Indo-European ne, not. So this alpha-privative is something you'll see all over in the formation of Greek words. Okay, so that's the second part of our review of the material we've covered so far, morphology and word types. Have a good day. Work hard, especially concentrate on your inflection of those demonstratives, especially hutos, haute, tuto. That's a little tricky. And continue to work hard. And thank you for being interested in Greek.